Alright guys, so today we're going to look at demo number 4 material. So we're going to be covering information related to file preparation for printing, talking about color profile, color gamuts, as well as places that you can go around to locally, and other things that you should also be prepared for in terms of getting a file printed. And hopefully getting back what you want from what you designed. So in our Illustrator file, last off when we were working with the demo, we had just finished up designing and working with the packaging template inside the demo. So you should have completed by now all 6 sides of the box design, as well as your poster design. For this, again, for this stage today, it's really looking at the final work on the file. So there's a checklist that we kind of need to run through in terms of going to print. So the first thing we're going to look at, number one, before really dealing with this file inside of Illustrator, what we need to do is actually work from a duplicate of our project file, because some of the things that we'll be doing today with this file are going to be permanent changes that you don't want enacted on your master file. Okay? So again, if you have your project open in front of you right now, this would be a good time to save your changes, close it out, and then go to where your project's stored. Now on my screen, I've got all my demo files kind of stored in the same place here. And here's my master file, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it on this screen. Quick duplication, Command C, Command V to paste. And you'll have your duplicate, which will say the full name and then the word copy at the end of it. And we're going to go ahead and rename it slightly, just tacking onto the front end of it the words print file. And this is just again just a signal cue for us to indicate that this is a file that we can use for printing strictly. You do not want to do this on your original master document. All right, now let's go ahead and launch that into Illustrator. And of course I have a little pop-up for my demo sketch not being attached to my document. That's okay if you get this pop-up. At this stage in the game, you should be done working from your demo sketch PDF. If you ever get this for other imagery that you're still working with, like you sketched a photograph and you still want to keep that image because you're not done with it, you have to go and relocate the file inside your computer by using the replace button right here. Okay. All right. So we've got our file up and we're ready to start doing some things. So number one, first thing that we want to do, we need to make sure that this thing is kind of in a good organized state. So we want to go and double check our layers and see how things are looking. Now, if you open up your layers panel down at the bottom of your layer panel, if you don't see it, by the way, you can always go up to Window and check to see if layers is checked. If it's checked, it's there. It looks like a double stack of white squares or white diamonds stacked on top of each other. And that's your layer panel. If this is your first time to open that, this might be, you're going to find out some very interesting things very quickly. Number one, if you haven't been doing any layer organizing, you're about to find yourself in the middle of that. Because when Illustrator draws in here, it draws a brand new layer for every single stroke line or shape that you have developed inside the software for a file. And that can get very meaty very quickly. Now if I'm looking on my screen here, now I've kind of kept things mostly under control. So most of my artboards are represented with individual layers. So one of the first steps here is to make sure that you have individual top level layers or main layers for each artboard. So on my screen I've got one established for my poster, and I haven't renamed it yet, which I'm about to do. But I have a layer established for my poster. I've got a layer established for the two side walls to the packaging. I have another layer here that's developed for this particular piece, the front. And I've got another layer for one of these pieces, and another one for that piece over there, for the base. I think that's the bottom. So the only thing that I haven't developed a layer for yet is this particular layer here, which I want to show you an example of whenever you're moving around and reorganizing layer material, what you need to do. And again, make sure that your graphics are separated into their own artboards. You can always try to double stack, right, and get things printed to where they're like side by side if they fit on the same sheet together. Helps for more economical purposes, like when you're printing and those kinds of things, especially for your own work. You know, don't spend more money than you have to. Make the most of what you're printing onto for free space, because you're paying for a whole sheet at the end of the day, not for the ink. So again, make sure that you use those artboards and those papers well. So I'm going to check here and see where these pieces for this particular layer are located. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to actually draw a selection box around everything inside this one artboard. You can pick any artboard you have to do this. And I'm going to select the whole thing right here. And then I'm going to look in my layer panel and look to see where the little blue square next to my target for my layer is located. So on my screen, it shows a little blue box next to layer 1. And that's over here to the right of the layer name and the target icon. So I'm going to go into that layer and expand it. And I'm going to look inside, and there immediately on this one, I've got little blue boxes all up and down these particular layers, and that indicates that all of these, with the little boxes, show that those are all currently selected on screen. And that means that they're all a part of this particular design element. So for all of those that I've got currently selected, I'm going to grab all of them and drag them into the layer that they need to go on. Now, if you don't have a new layer established, you need to create one. To create a new layer, it's pretty easy. You just click on this little flip piece of paper icon at the bottom of your layer panel, and that will drop in a new empty layer for you to use. All right, I'm going to go back into layer 1, where my other layers are actually located. Yours might be somewhere else. Just pay attention for that little square color icon.
Do we need to have each segment in its own?
Try to keep them all together. If it's a part of an artboard, it should be with that layer, all of the other pieces to that layer.
So one artboard should be one layer, basically.
Yes, exactly. And I've got, if you look at my screen here, I have exactly 6 layers, and that's for all 6 of my artboards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Should we group them? Will that help?
It can help, yes. You can actually group at any point. Grouping is kind of nice because it puts it all together, like they make them into one single sublayer. And then you can just grab that one little sublayer and then drag it up to its new layer home for the artboard it represents.
New home.
That's right. So yes, you can definitely do that once you've selected all of them. And again, when I'm selecting them, I just go through. Now they're already grabbed up here, so you don't have to do it down here. But if you've already got them selected up above, you can actually control click somewhere on the actual design in that artboard and then go to group. And where they're located inside the layer stack, now it's just one sublayer that's all grouped together, and you can just grab this one sublayer that they're all stacked inside of. So I'm going to drag that into layer 6. And now everything for that layer should be together. Now in mine, I actually had 2 things going on. This background color box I left floating because I need to add it to this layer. I forgot to move it in there. So if for any reason you have that happening, you got to locate where that is. And just moving it over to the layer, by the way, it doesn't really do anything. But I'm going to grab it from inside layer 4 where it's currently showing it's selected. It's probably at the bottom. Yep. Go figure. And I'm going to take that and drag it all the way up and put it, oh no, not up, I'm sorry. I think that one's supposed to go down. Yeah, put it into layer 6. There we go. Now when you're moving around layers, guys, be aware of the layer order as you do this, okay? Because you can instantly wreck your design if you get the layers out of order. Now look on my screen, I did that. So this background color is completely covering up my design inside of this layer. So it's easy to fix, you just need to change up the order. So there's my rectangle and there's the rest of the design right here. So I'm just going to drag my rectangle right below it and my template shows up back on top.
Grouping them did help.
Yes, good.
Because it removed a ton of paths.
Yeah, and that's kind of nice when you're working in the layer stack because you can end up with literally thousands of pathway lines from a design.
My posters for sure like that.
Yeah, so again, like when you're working through it, work smarter, not harder, where you can, right? So groups are great.
I did that during this time. So.
All right, so once you've got everybody separated out, again, you can go through and select items on each artboard, making sure that all of the layer content for that artboard is located inside of one artboard and not in 3 or 4 of them. I'm going back to my poster and making sure that what's in the poster is supposed to be there, and it looks good. So once you get them all reorganized, the next step is then go ahead and actually renaming these layers according to what they actually are. So to rename, it's the same as Photoshop. You can just double click on the name of the layer and then you can type over it what it represents. Now in my design, there are several things, and in the demo file you're going to have several pieces for your demo packaging. Again, depending on how many you shoved onto one artboard. I happen to have 2 on one artboard down here, and then the rest are independent. So what I'm going to do is identify each piece, and the convenience of the template we use actually tells us what side is what, or what piece is what. So if you look when you zoom in, there's tiny text below each template, and it tells you at the end of the text what piece it is. So this tells me that this is the right side of the template box, and this is the left side of the template box. If you did not copy and paste those over with your template, you're going to be playing a guessing game. And the other thing to keep in mind is that with your own templating or whatever you're doing, you may not have the convenience of that text, right? Like maybe you won't be designing a box for your piece. I mean, it could just be a wraparound label or a piece of paper that you're sticking onto another object, for all I know. But label them according to what they're going to be used for, okay, in that case. So I've got a right and a left side, so I'm going to double click on the name and I'm going to type in right and left side for that layer. And then I'm going to identify what this layer is. And it's this box icon piece up here, which I think is the front of the box. Yes, it says front. So I'm going to take that layer, which was 4, and call it front. And then I'll keep going through identifying each piece to figure out what they are. Again, you can use like the targeting icon in the layer stack to kind of reactivate the entire contents of a whole layer so you can see where it is instantly. So that you know what you're looking at. This one says it's the back. It's kind of hard to read because it's black on black. But it says back right there. So I know that I need to change that one to back, which means that that's the front, and this little short black one over here is the bottom. So I'll call that the bottom, which leaves the last one over here, the top. So I'll call that top, and then I need my last one called poster, because I haven't labeled my poster artboard yet. And when you're done, every layer should have a title and should be well separated. Again, you should not have everything inside of the same artboard. Bad organization. Also bad if you're trying to hand off the file to someone later to work with. It's incredibly difficult to navigate. So keep it well separated. All right. So now that we've kind of identified how to get our layers in order and keeping that stuff arranged, we then go through our design and make sure there are no stray layers or graphics or text objects floating around out here in Never Never Land, right? The big gray dead space around your artboards is not just a holding place for the rest of your vector junk, right? That you're not using, especially in the print file. Remember, that's why we duplicated our original. So again, you'll want to make sure that you get rid of any excess stuff that you don't want to print or print by accident. It has happened in the past where someone will try to print something and a graphic they had floating off the side of the artboard ended up printing, and they wasted paper, time, money, and those types of things occur. So look around your artboards, make sure there's nothing out here that's unnecessary. If you have to, switch your view even from the top and go to outline. And this is a much clearer way to see excess stuff floating out here if you can't see it on the big gray screen, because it just shows it denoted by a black outline. So if you use that view and look around and there's nothing weird out here, then you're pretty much okay. Other things you can identify at this stage in getting your file ready for print are pixel-based images. Because we shouldn't be using any pixel-based images like photographs or images that you use to like trace around, you should not be printing those in your designs, okay? So make sure that you get rid of them for the print file. Now I know that mine is still floating in here for my mouth object or my sketch. The reason I know that in the outline view shows any objects that have been placed by having a giant X that appears through the center of an entire rectangular image area. And that shows me right away that I have some sort of sketch file or something floating in that spot. So I don't want it there, need to delete it. Select it, get rid of it. And that's just good to do.
Is it outline view?
Yes, yeah. Outline is the view I'm currently using. And again, that's just good for previewing the outline forms of vectors, where things are located in the basics, and also for identifying extra stuff you don't need. All right, I'm going to go out of outline now. Okay, now once you've identified that step, the next things to check are for your graphics. This is to make sure things are full bleed where they need to be, that there's no cutoff in fill colors where there ought not to be, that text is inside the perimeter of your artboard, etc. So we'll start by looking at text. So first off, review places where you have text and make sure that if it's something that's not supposed to be cut off of the artboard, that it's actually inside the boundaries of the artboard. When we convert this into a printable document later, anything outside the artboard perimeter will get removed or will not appear in the print file, okay? So I go into my poster first because that's where my first round of information is located. And I make sure that none of my text is floating off, down, past, or around the edge of the perimeter. Good things to check for. Obviously, make sure things like text around borders, by the way, guys, make sure there's some breathing room. It's not good to just flippantly have text all the way to the edge like this. It gets very hard to read because everything outside the poster edge is either going to be cut off or it's going to look white, or it's going to be the border of whatever board you put it on. Makes it very hard to read that text, okay? So make sure that you give your text breathing room in the design by keeping it distanced away from the edge, okay? But again, check that there's no text being clipped. So far, so good. And you may look around your other documents to make sure there's no text bleeding off the sides of the artboards where it's necessary to keep it. It's funny. This one actually bleeds off the edge, but it's not that big of a deal because this is text I don't need. I might want the piece that says front, right? So I know how to identify it later when I print it, but I don't need this little part that has the website, right? So you just make choices about stuff like that. The next step is to check for the graphics. Okay, so where you're supposed to have background full color imagery, right? Like in my screen, I've got the poster here, and inside the poster, or inside the artboard for the poster, I have a main background color, this yellow that goes all the way through the background. If you have graphics that are supposed to go to the edge of the print area, make it go past it, okay? That's called being full bleed. Gives you a little room for margin of error in case, for purposes of cutting, okay? So give yourself room for that. Don't accidentally end up with this action where you think you've got it like perfectly on the line, because almost always when people do that, it almost doesn't ever do that. Sometimes it ends up being like just barely inside the line, and then you have a white border that's off, you know. Those kinds of things can look weird with graphics. So make sure your stuff goes past the perimeter of the artboard all the way out. And that counts for any graphics at all. Now over here, I've got a different situation where it's just these templates, and really with the templates, if you're working with one, making sure that if it has a background color, it just goes past the perimeter of the template outline. It won't matter if it gets past the perimeter of the artboard, because what you're cutting at in this case is along this line that goes around the edge for this. Is the idea. So make sure that background colors for that are full bleed and go outside of it. If it's your own design, again, make sure that graphics appear where you want them to. If you were building the same box and you didn't want the blue to go past the dotted line, right, like the folding line, then you would want to make sure that it's perfectly lined up on the interior and not just kind of floating around out here like this, or partially, right, which could look a little sloppy. So make sure to avoid the sloppy. Okay, so you go around, you double check to make sure that's going on, that all important graphic material is inside your artboard, nothing's outside the edges unless it's unless you don't care about it getting cut off. We check around for all of those pieces. And let me pull up my notes because I had them open and then they all shut out on me. But you want to make sure you have all of those covered. Let me get these open. Make sure I don't miss a step for you guys here. All right. Okay, so here's a good one. Review all of your text and titles, all that stuff for spelling. Please. Please review for spelling and grammar errors, okay? Again, on a poster that deals specifically in information, that should be a key factor that you want to get right. Looks really unprofessional in the real world, especially when you get the title wrong, you know, or like you forgot to add a period and it looked like a run-on sentence suddenly, or misspelled words all over the place. So make sure to double check that. If you need to copy the text out into a Word doc to use spell check, that's fine, or get a second set of eyes to look with you, great. Or use, again, like the Writing Center on campus. They're more than happy to work with you. So go through, check your stuff, zoom in on it, make sure it is reading well. Obviously our placeholder text, it's kind of not mattering when you're reading Latin, so you know. But when you're working with your own document, make sure it's good to go. All right. Now comes some of the stuff where the changes we make are permanent. So yeah, I know, I hear all the groans in the room. Yeah.
I mean, my computer's not really working, so it's okay.
Well, you're going to have to fix that too. All right. So here's what's going to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to do actually two separate things. We're going to be creating outlines and expanding appearances. So let's start with creating outlines. The concept of creating outlines in Illustrator is a method used for working with converting text into vectors. And the benefit of that, let me kind of help you understand some of that. In the world of print, when working with graphics, it is not uncommon to find the problem of my typeface got changed when I sent it to this printer with this company. And that almost always happens when you have text that is just embedded inside the document but not converted into a shape. Okay? Professional designers have to deal with that all the time, so often they send their text file or their font file with their document so that it can be reviewed by the client with the correct typefaces and things in place. But when you're sending documents to print, posters you make or whatever, if you ever experience that problem, it's because the receiving computer doesn't have your typeface used. It's a basic problem because there are so many out there and they're not standardized. And everyone uses something a little different, especially if you just move between a Mac and a PC. So one way to fix the problem is to work with creating outlines from your type. So we'll start basic here, and I'll show you a short example. So I'm going to start with this text here for this sidewall that says language. I'm going to select the text box, and I'm going to go up to the top menu item that says type. You scroll down on the type menu, go down to where it says create outlines. Now this is an instant process. You click on this, there's no in-between option menu, it just does it. So if you notice on my screen that my text now has lots and lots and lots of itty-bitty anchor points that go around the design. Now I know in the projection image it's a little hard to see because of this really awful looking green that it's assigned to this layer. You can actually change layer colors, by the way. If you go into your layer stack and double click on like the thumbnail for the layer, you can reassign the color that it's using. So I'm going to use something that's a little bit easier on the eyes. There we go. Yeah. So now you can see all of my text is defined by anchor points. And in Illustrator, that's a quick indication that it is also now being read as a shape instead of type. So what does that mean? That's actually a twofold thing that's happened. First off, it means that your text won't get replaced if you go and send this to a printer. Okay, it's not going to get replaced with another type format. What it also means is that you can't go back and retype over this text anymore. So this is a permanent change to the text by converting it from a type box or type object into a vector outline shape or collection of vector shapes. Which, by the way, if you want to ever have fun with like type and you just want to play around with the anchor points around it, this is a great way to work with that. You just expand the text, switch to one of your manipulation tools, and then you can have fun. And if I grab the right thing, and you can play with the letter forms. So you can very quickly, you can very quickly have fun with individual letters and things that you've expanded. So that's also kind of available when you do that, when you convert or expand or create outlines from type. Okay, so we did it with the word type or with language, right? So now we need to do it pretty much to all other text in our document. So I'm going to go through one by one, converting stuff over. So, whoops.
Sir,
yes.
are we doing for the 3 paragraphs?
Yes. No. The trick there is that even with the paragraphs, the problems you can run into is just the same. If someone doesn't have your font and you bring it over, your type paragraphs could all get replaced with some really wild-looking typeface. And I've seen students have it happen, and they try to explain to me, I don't know what happened. Even though I gave them the same conversation about expanding and creating outlines, they get a poster to me that went from looking like this really kind of clean, streamlined kind of font to wingdings, you know, and trying to pass it off, and it looked really bad, and it just didn't work out.
Then
So
after making into the outline thingy
Yep.
for the type, can I group Just
Yes,
not
they are
making-
actually grouped right now.
Oh, really?
Well, actually, no, my mistake. Sometimes they are, but in this case, yeah, they're all completely ungrouped. So yeah, if you want to regroup them, just select all of them and then do group. Control click on one to group them together. Yep. But again, go through all of your type and create outlines from everybody where applicable. If you want to do it really fast, you could just select everything at one time, right? And then do one fell swoop and create outlines on the top. And then everything is done in an instant. So if you know you're going to do it with everything regardless, you could just do that. Save yourself the trouble. Okay, so that's creating outlines. Again, you can only create outlines from type. Okay, that's why that command is listed under type. Now, the next step is to double check and expand all appearances inside of your graphics. Appearances include anything from stroke line colors to gradient fills, any special effects that you've applied inside of Illustrator. So that's like 3D, scribble, anything from the 3D or the filter menu. Any of that stuff can be done to what's called expanding. Even some of the special drawing tools in here, like if you guys remember when we worked with the blend tool, when we took two shapes and made them blend across the screen, that's an appearance. An appearance, again, is anything that has like a virtual visualization to it. So to give you kind of a quick illustration, I'm going to draw a little rectangle out here and give it a stroke. And I'm going to thicken up that stroke line so that you can see the stroke really well. Okay, make it ridiculous. There we go. Yes, question.
How did you turn the letters on their side without converting them to a shape?
Are you talking about the language, the word
Yeah.
language? I used what was called point type. So I didn't
So
make
you
a
drew
text
the-
box.
You drew the line and then.
I didn't. No, actually, I didn't even draw a line. If you just click once with the type cursor, it creates point type,
Okay.
and then you just type away, and then you can rotate that without it rotating, without it just twisting the shape area.
Okay.
Yeah, area type when you make like a text box, yeah, that just rotates the box around the text, and the
Yeah.
text doesn't move with it. That's how I did it.
Okay.
Yeah. You could also expand the text beforehand and then rotate all of it at once is another way, but if you're not done editing, that's kind of a bummer, right?
Yeah.
So point type is a better way to go in that case. Okay, so first thing to notice about this giant rectangle I just put on screen, when it's selected, notice that the perimeter of the selection is inside the rectangle area. It's not actually going around the outer perimeter. What that's indicating is the original dimension of the rectangle that I started with. All the rest of this stroke outline stuff, that's the appearance material, okay? So it doesn't have any actual vector shape qualities to it yet. It's just kind of there, is the way you can think of it. It's like a ghost in the machine. So what we need to do to make sure that when you send it out to a printer that this stroke line does not get manipulated by the retaining software on the other side, which has happened. It's another one of those weird things. I've seen a student send a poster or a graphic to print, and they come back, and the stroke line comes back thinner or thicker than they actually had in their graphics. And it's because the receiving software reinterpreted the stroke point depth. So to keep that from happening, we're going to convert our stroke into a shape. So we're going to do that by using the expand command. So I'm going to have my shape selected, and I'm going to go to Object this time, and I'm going to go down to Expand. Now, if it's a simple object like this, the Expand Options menu opens automatically, but it doesn't always. If you have multiple objects selected at a time that you want to expand at once, sometimes you have to click on Expand once or twice. And I'll show you that in a minute. So the first time it comes up, it gives me options and it asks me, what do you want to expand? We've got fill or stroke, And that's our current options because our shape only has those two options available. So I'm going to go ahead and expand both of them and say, okay. Now notice what happened to my shape after that. Look around the perimeter here. See this? It's got a new blue outline around the outer edge of the stroke, and it's got an interior line that goes on the inside of the stroke path. So what that tells me is that now my stroke path is independent of my shape. So it's actually kind of cool. Like I could even independently separate them. If I double click, I can drag my stroke path away from my object. So you could have kind of an offset path kind of look. Or if you just want to keep the path or delete the fill, this is another kind of funny way to do it. But the important thing to remember here for printing is that now both of those objects are not just appearances, but they are actual shapes inside the system. They are vectors. So when you go into your own design, you want to get everything that needs to be expanded. So I'm just going to do the same thing I did before with the type and grab everything at once. And from this point, I'm going to go ahead and go back to Object. Now notice this. Expand is no longer available, but Expand Appearances. So I'm going to click on Expand Appearance because that's all I've got. And sometimes that's enough to do what it needs to do. But if it's not, reselect everything, go back to Object, and notice this time that now Expand, just regular Expand is available. So now I'm going to hit regular Expand, and the dialog pops up that gives me options, and I'm going to say OK. And typically when you get that box popped up, that's usually the indication that you fully expanded all objects and appearances inside of your design. Okay. So now I can kind of quickly zoom in and take a look where I've got places where there were stroke colors used. They should all be solids now and shapes instead of something else. So it's looking good. Looking good now. You may get different options, by the way, pop up if you have like a gradient fill in your design. If you have an object that looks, like this, but it has gradients applied to it, right? If you expand that, you actually get a different option. First off, it identifies where the gradient is, which is in the fill color, and then it gives you expand gradient to. And you get several options you can choose from. You can expand it to a mesh, or you can specify how many colored steps it draws to complete this transition from one tone or however many tones. Because a gradient on its own is not technically a vector color system. So it has to represent it in solid colors to be considered part of a vector. So to do it right, you would need to specify the number of steps and say OK. And then you'll get a fairly decent representation, but eventually, even that breakdown of the gradient, if you zoom in far enough, you can actually see like the gradations between different areas. Now it's really, to the human eye, it's going to be almost invisible. You shouldn't be able to tell if you have enough steps. 255 for this object was plenty. But that's what's there now to help it be represented correctly later. Okay, so expanding. So that's the last part of kind of working with getting your graphics prepared. So we created outlines from type. We expanded all of our visual graphics. And now we're ready to kind of move on from here and get ready for color, dealing with color profile information. So there are a few things you can look at inside of Illustrator for dealing with the color profile. Everything is about the output intent. So what are you going to use the file for after you're done designing it in Illustrator at the end of the day? So there are a couple options. Number one, when you create a document in Illustrator, normally you get the option to set the color mode at the bottom of the screen in the new File menu. If you forget to set that, it sets it for you. and that's okay. But to check to see what it is in your document, go up to File, and then go down to where it says Document Color Mode, towards the bottom. And you should see a checkbox next to either CMYK or RGB color. And each of these are for different intents at the end of the day. Number one, to help you understand RGB versus CMYK, I'll show you a little visualization here. This is actually a color system gamut that shows you the visualization for perceptual color versus screen color versus printed color. So the perceptual range, which is what the human eye can see, is kind of based on this outer edge, the outer biggest area of this entire color shape. So all colors encased in here are visible in the human spectrum, in theory. Now, that being said, inside of that are several other color spaces. The first one that dips in here gives you an example of a high color space. Adobe RGB is a basic one, and it's got a pretty big space. Like, it reaches deep into the greens, and it gets far over towards cyan, and it dips into the reds. So it covers everything inside the spectrum fairly well. I mean, it's not as big as the human eye can see and can consume, but it's a start. Adobe RGB is also a screen resolution color system. So that's based on digital color. Now when we move down here, we also have a black outline system, and that's for CMYK. CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. The K has several definitions, and one of them is Kelvin and one is key for the words that stands for, and it's really just based on a example color of black to base all other color renditions off of. Often printers will have a representation color bar next to their printed graphic to make sure that everything is printing correctly, that the printer's calibrated. So if the black looks rich and perfect the way they need it, then everything else should be fine. So CMYK dips into each of the color spectrums. It's a little bit more muddy. Obviously, it's a smaller area than RGB or Adobe RGB, so its color is not going to be as expanded. And that's all from applying inks in a physical print paper format. The next section is the sRGB or standard RGB system. That's commonly associated with monitor color and with inkjet printing. More specifically, like printing photographs and those kinds of things. Typically use sRGB, which is the one you find the most often at print shops, like low-run places, office stores, and those kinds of things. Occasionally, you find places like that actually use a CMYK system, but there's no guarantee. So this is kind of just an idea of seeing how color is understood, that some systems reach different colors or have different behaviors towards different colors. All right, so back in our file, on my document, it's currently set for RGB, which is the widest spectrum, okay? And that's great for when you're developing for screen. So if you're taking these graphics and you're putting them on a website, awesome. RGB is what you should be designing inside of. If you were, again, presenting it for a photographic print from a photographic printer, you should probably be working in RGB as well. However, that being said, if your intent is to not work on the screen for your final output product and you're sending it to a printer that accepts CMYK profile color, then you need to be using CMYK, typically. But again, it all is dependent on the printer that it's going to. If the receiving printer does not have a CMYK profile system, then you will end up with very muddy, mushy colors at the end of the day if the wrong profile is applied. So my recommendation is always to call ahead or communicate with whoever you're going to print with and ask them what the profile is that the printer is going to be used, based on the document you're going to send. So you would probably want to tell them, hey, I'm going to be sending an 11 by 17 full color poster graphic, what printer would that be going through and what profile is it using? Just some basic questions, okay, so that you get the right thing set. You can also ask them, does it cut off my graphics if they're full bleed? Does it print a white border if I'm trying to print my graphics out to the edge of the design? Ask them those questions. Often 11 by 17, not everybody has, to be honest with you. So you may be printing on a poster size that's slightly larger than 11 by 17, and then just have to trim off the excess border, is usually what happens, and that's okay. But you want to identify that. Now, while you're working on the document in here, to get profiles and stuff assigned correctly, again, once you've identified the intent of the printer that you're going to, let's just say that it's going to be an RGB printer, okay? I'm going to leave mine on RGB color for my color mode for my document. And then I'm going to go up to View on the top menu bar. And I'm going to go over here to where, where it says Proof Setup. And this is just for previewing inside of the software mostly. But proofing, I'm going to have it set for what's appropriate with RGB. It's not going to be CMYK, by the way. I'm going to put it for sRGB. Now, once I set that, I want to also make sure that this is checked for proof colors. And then that will make sure that what you see on screen in Illustrator is kind of a simulated soft proof of what it's going to do when it prints it. Again, it's simulated, so it's not perfect when it's on screen. But I can leave those two things on. Now, again, if you're working in CMYK, like switch your color mode to CMYK, go back to View, and make sure that your proof, it should switch automatically, by the way. So my proof is now set to working CMYK. And I turn on proof colors just to make sure that my design matches. You might actually notice visibly on screen a change in colors, especially in blacks. Blacks between RGB and CMYK are different, okay? Because they use completely different coloring systems to generate color. CMYK is considered a subtractive system, and RGB is considered an additive system. So it just works a little differently with the way that it mixes color together.
No.
Well, I can go in depth, but you can look it up. Like, it's a pretty, like, it's not an unusual thing. If you look up RGB versus CMYK, you will find tons on color mixing and how it works. It's a little bit much to talk about during the demo today, but as much as you need to know that one's really great for monitor and one's really great for printing. So, okay. So you get those things established, and now we're ready to kind of start dealing with the final processes here. So number one, make sure that you know what artboards are what in your design, like what the artboard numbers indicate. To find that out, you can do it two ways. Number one, you could click on a graphic inside of an artboard, and it will tell you down below the document, in this little drop-down box, it tells me that this is number 1. If you can't see that, make sure that your document is visible on screen. But if I look inside mine, I have this graphic on my poster selected, and it tells me down here in this drop box that that's 1. That 1 indicates that it is artboard number 1. Now if I click over here on this neighboring artboard that's next to it, it now tells me that's artboard number 2, because that graphic is rested inside of that particular artboard. And I can keep going around, and I get a different number for all of these other ones as well. So you want to make sure that you take stock of what's what. Sometimes when sending things to print, it's good to keep them separated instead of making one giant document that has everything tied together. And when you're creating the print file for this, it's going to be possible to do that. Okay? So I'm going to go in, and now that I've kind of understood like what's what out here, I'm going to go to File And I've got a couple options for saving outputs inside of Illustrator. The first one I'll show you is called Export. Export gives you access to mostly raster graphic formats. So if you want to save like a JPEG of your design, you know, maybe to like display on a web page, you know, to show off your stuff, you can do it from the export command. Now when you export JPEGs of an artboard, it will export everything that does stick out from the sides of the artboard, okay? So you may have to trim down your graphics to fit inside your artboard area if you want it to be shown. Otherwise, yeah, it'll be a gigantic image. So you can get to JPEG from here. Bitmap, PNG is also available in this menu. And then the one we will use is from Save As. So I'm going to go there next. And under Save As, I'm going to just quickly change the location to my desktop for where I'm going to output this file to, so I can find it. I'm going to switch the format and go to Adobe PDF, and that's the print file you want to create. Generally, PDF is, again, it's a universal exchange format, but it's great for graphics and images, text and image put together in the same document. This is great to print from, send, email, all of that stuff. But that's the one you're going to be using. So we'll select that, and then we have the option at the bottom here to select any artboards, like if we want to send all artboards to our PDF or just a certain number of them. So you can actually tell it which artboards you want to put into the same document together. So it's like working, if you're familiar with like a word processor, you can actually select which pages you want to send to print, for instance. Same concept. You can use dashes or commas to indicate number of pages you need. So either system works just fine here. But this is where I was saying earlier, if you wanted to print your poster separately from your graphics, this may be a great time to have your poster set as an independent PDF file. So you would only print like that artboard, in my case artboard number 1, and export it and then, or save it, and then come back and then save all of your packaging designs onto a separate PDF. Might be good. Okay. Now I'm going to leave it as is for now, all of them, and say save. And then we get this lovely pop-up. Okay. So there's some things inside the PDF manager that you need to take care of before you finish saving the file. So take note of these. These are important. First off, uncheck this box under Options that says Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities. You do not need to preserve that stuff with a file that's only meant to be printed from, okay? All you do after that is that you end up bogging down the memory and the RAM in the file by making it editable in Illustrator at the same time. That's what your master file is made for, so you don't need it in the PDF. All right, now we're going to go over here to this little menu on the left, and I'm going to click on where it says Compression. And this is just to double check. You shouldn't have anything show up here. Every option in here should say do not downsample, do not downsample, do not downsample. This page actually typically deals with raster graphics inside of your PDF. So if you were creating a PDF document that had photographs and graphics, like vector graphics, you get the opportunity here to actually do file compression on those to make them smaller for sharing with friends, putting in the email, or proofing with a client. You can actually downsample your images. But in the case of our purposes, we want to print it and we want it to look sharp on the front end. So we do not want anything compressed. That'll remove quality and drop the quality of the imagery. You can even uncheck this box at the bottom that says compress text and line art. Fun one to know about if you ever do kind of go deeper into like printing and press work. They have a marks and bleeds section in here, so you can actually print like color bars onto your document to double check your blacks to make sure they match from your printer, or you can actually print trim marks onto your document, which is commonly used in big batch printing and cutting. Often when you're printing a document that's smaller than the sheet it's going on, it'll print little crop marks all around your document so that it knows where to cut when it's sent through a cutting machine, or hand cut even. Okay. All right, last one to look at is the output item. So under output, the only other things left here deal with color specifically. So one of those things is dealing with either color conversion or profile inclusion. Now with your document, you should want to include a profile because you've associated one with it, sRGB or some form of CMYK. So you want to make sure that that does travel with the document. So you can include things like you can actually set it to include all profiles for all content. It's an easy one. You can use the tag source, which is, it gives you descriptions, by the way, as you go through them. So this is for native colors and placed objects that don't have an embedded profile. Or the last one, include all RGB and tag source. So this includes tagged RGBs and document RGBs. Also includes profiles for tag CMYKs, which is also a good one to use too. So either this one or even the all one is probably fine. The one that you kind of watch for where it says color conversion up here, typically you don't mess with very often. But if you wanna mess with it, like if your printer gives you weird color sets back, like you send one thing to print and it comes out weird. Sometimes it's based on this setting under color conversion. You may have to come in and change this over to where it says convert to destination, but preserve the numbers. Preserving numbers means to actually preserve the RGB color numbers inside your document so they don't get written over by another receiving program. So it reads it pound for pound based on original colored number systems. So hexadecimal numbers are recorded, Pantone colors are recorded, spot colors are recorded, RGB numbers, and so on. But you don't have to start with that. Okay, so that's pretty much all that I'm going to show you in here. We'll go ahead and say save after that at the bottom. And it'll give you one last chance to tell you that, hey, by the way, you uncheck that magical box for making this a Illustrator editable document. And that still doesn't matter at this point. Remember, this doesn't save. There's no way that the computer can save over your original Illustrator file with another format, okay? Machines can't do that. They always make a second file to go with it. So in our case, it's going to make a PDF duplicate. So I don't care if this says this. Just say OK. And it does the work. And I will go out to my desktop and check. There's my PDF. I'm going to open it. And when you preview a PDF, by the way, make sure you look at it in an official PDF reader like Adobe Acrobat Reader. Do not use one of the preview utilities on your computer like Mac Preview, for instance. Worst color rendition ever. Does not look accurate at all. So, at any rate, you look at what you get. And again, you review your document, make sure everything kind of looks the way it was supposed to from your original design. And if it does, then you're in good shape. Always, always, always review the PDF before you go and start printing from it so you don't waste money, okay? Check that those typefaces and fonts are okay. I do want to show you one little funny nuance that occurs with PDF conversion that's sometimes it's unfortunate, that sometimes can't be helped. When you use a typeface for small fonts or small type that is very plain looking, like a sans serif font like Helvetica, every now and then, and you may notice this when you do it, that sometimes these simple letters that look like straight lines, like L's, just look a little thicker in the design after you convert it to a PDF. And what's actually happened is that they've actually been made thicker through the conversion process by like a fraction of a point. something in the PDF coding does not allow easy conversion of those things. And the only solve that I've heard of that fixes that, besides not expanding your paragraph text, is to go in and actually add an additional anchor point to each of your simple letter forms, like L's and I's, to keep it from changing the width of those letter forms. And it just does something weird whenever it reads a rectangular letter form that looks like a rectangle but isn't. It expands its size ever so slightly. So it looks weird in print, it looks weird on screen sometimes. It doesn't happen with typefaces that are kind of articulated and have more ornamentation around the edges, but those basic fonts sometimes just don't translate well. So just keep that in mind. All right, and once you have your PDF together, then you are good for sending your work off to print. And that's basically all there is to cover in terms of dealing with the demo file. Other things that you should be taking consideration of at this stage in the game should include like getting it printed, right? Where you can go. Again, if you're doing a web search, like looking for local printers, office printing shops are fine. Places like, or at least around us, you know, we have things like FedEx Office. We have Staples, Office Depot. You have Bird's Copies, which is really close to campus. And then I think there's some other odds and ends places. If you're doing like t-shirt shops do like decal printing, vinyl printing, and those kinds of things that they adhere to the shirts. And those are specialty shops, but they have those around Arlington as well. I think there's one really close by that's down in Pantego off of Park Row that you can get to. So there's a little shirt printing shop down there, if that's part of your project at all. But things that I want you to consider when sending things off or getting them ready for print, make sure you are allotting yourself time. Time to get it printed. Time for errors. So if you printed it and it looked like crap after you left the shop without looking at it accurately, right? And now you had to make another trip to go back. Or you miscut something, right? You were cutting along the side of the edge of an object and you sliced right through the cutting materials and ruined the graphic instantly. That's a bummer. You spilt your coffee all over it because you didn't, get enough sleep. You let your dog eat half of it. Your roommate dropped his pizza on it. I'm just kind of listing these. You'd think that they've all happened before. Or if you have kids, they turned it into their coloring book exercise. So whatever applies to you, give yourself time to deal with problems, okay? You don't want to be trying to do this like last minute will be difficult, okay? Especially with assembly, like when you're putting stuff together. So just make sure you have all your supplies. If you know you have to glue it together, buy some glue, get it early, get it now. If you need to cut it, make sure you got the cutting tools you need. All those things are important. But always give yourself room and give yourself time to deal with them. You really, really, really do not want to wait till the last minute to get that stuff done or taken care of. All right, so that concludes this demo. Again, from here, it's just getting things printed and assembled and ready for critique day.